Good morning, Year 4, and welcome to today's English lesson. Coming at you live from the kitchen. And today we are carrying on with our persuasive devices. This is the last one that we're going to be looking at before we start planning our writing, which you will find out about, shall I say, in due course tomorrow and further on in the week. Today we are creating rhetorical questions. That is a very fancy word, rhetorical questions, but it's a very easy concept to get your head around. We'll come on to that in just a moment. Before we start, a recap on statements, questions, or remarks. So I'm going to show you some sentences that are missing the final piece of punctuation at the end. Okay, I want you to tell me whether those sentences are a statement, I need a full stop, whether they're a question, I need a question mark, or whether they're a remark, I need a exclamation mark. Sometimes remarks are called exclamations as well. There's not really a general name for them, but we have statements, questions, and remarks. Okay, so you're going to have to add a full stop, a question mark, or an exclamation mark. What about this one? Where have all the children disappeared to? Well, that's a pretty easy start, isn't it? Because it's asking a question. So at the end of that one, we'd have a question. Easy, isn't it? Have a go at this one. I don't believe it. What about that one? That one, you could say, is a remark. It's an exclamation where you're expressing something with a lot of power and emotion. I don't believe it! Exclamation mark. Unfortunately, we will have to repeat this task. You can see there, we've got a fronted adverbial like we learned about last week, and we followed that with a comma. But at the end of the sentence, what should we have? Well, this one here is a statement. It just gives us information. It's not asking a question. It's not making a generally passionate remark. Okay, so that would just be a full stop. What do you mean? Now, what do you mean? What do you think? What do you mean? It's a straightforward one because it starts with a question word, so that's going to be a question mark. And that is one that we could come back to later on in this lesson. Almost all of the sentences are correct. Is this sentence a statement, a question, or a remark? This one is just stating something. It's a statement. So we're going to have a full stop. Wow. Full stop, question mark, or exclamation mark. Straightforward one. That's an exclamation mark. Now, I know sometimes, especially if you've been texting or you've been writing an informal message, you might be inclined to put more than one exclamation mark. Really, in your writing, you should always just use one at a time. I'm guilty of that. I do that when I'm getting really passionate about something. I might put double or triple exclamation marks. But when you're doing your writing, especially in school, can I just ask that you just use one exclamation mark? Okay. Would you do it like this? Full stop, question mark, or exclamation mark? What do you think, U4? Would you do it like this? That is another question. So it's a question mark at the end. And finally, plastic pollution is having a catastrophic event on our oceans. Plastic pollution is having a catastrophic effect on our oceans. You can see that sentence there has got the word catastrophic in. I've got some emotive language. Okay, I'm going over the top. I'm exaggerating a little bit. Okay, but that one there is just a statement. That would end in a full stop. Okie dokie. Let's move on. Now we know statements, questions, and remarks. Questions, though. Although all questions include a question mark, do all questions require an answer? Can you think of a question that doesn't require an answer? If I said, what's the capital of France? Well, that would have an answer because I'm asking you for some information. But if I asked you, sort of, what do you think you're doing? Would I always be looking for an answer? Those sort of questions, Year 4, we call rhetorical questions. Rhetorical question is a question that doesn't require an answer necessarily, but instead makes the audience, whether that be a reader or a listener, makes them think. They can be extremely useful when we're doing persuasive writing. And some starters, some really good rhetorical question starters include the ones I've got written there. Have you ever thought, question mark, how could you possibly, Question mark. Do you really want? Question mark. Who would or who wouldn't? Question mark. Or isn't it time that? Question mark. I'm going to show you a short video that talks more about these sentence starters, and your task today is seeing if you can come up with some rhetorical questions using these starters to come up with some rhetorical questions regarding plastic pollution and the environment. Okay, I'll show you this video, and then we'll have another chat before I set you off on your task.
A rhetorical question can be an exceptional persuasive technique, but how do you write a rhetorical question that not only reaches your audience, but persuades them too? Well, this video will answer that question. Welcome, authors, to Next Level Writing. In this video, we will investigate rhetorical questions and my top 5 starters that you can use to write your own rhetorical question. Before we begin, please take it by a comment. The content that you are talking about in your persuasive writing, they are still connected by a common thread. With that being said, here are my top 5 rhetorical question starters to make your life a little bit easier. Rhetorical question starter number 1. Have you ever thought? Have you ever thought is a great way to start a rhetorical question. This is because you are asking the question directly to the audience and, considering they are reading your writing, there is a good chance you have forced some thoughts inside their mind and they will make the connections. Rhetorical question examples that begin with have you ever thought include: have you ever thought there may be more to life than playing games? Have you ever thought of the consequences of deforestation? Have you ever thought that space travel could bring about more challenges than we are ready for? Rhetorical question starter number 2. How could you possibly? How could you possibly is an excellent rhetorical question starter when you want to highlight a devastating outcome or a hyperbolic statement. To use this starter effectively, think disastrous. Examples of rhetorical questions that begin with how could you possibly include: how could you possibly want an animal species to go extinct? How could you possibly treat another person inhumanely? Or even, how could you possibly think that this is the right thing to do? Rhetorical question starter number 3. Do you really want? Do you really want is similar to the last example of rhetorical question starter, but with one difference. This one is more useful for current events rather than future catastrophic events. It can also be a bit more abstract in nature. Rhetorical question examples that begin with do you really want include: do you really want to make that decision? Do you really want life to be like that? Do you really want to leave that type of legacy? Rhetorical question starter number 4. Who would or who wouldn't? Who would or who wouldn't is a more informal style of rhetorical question starter. This is an excellent starter if you would like to add a bit of levity to some very serious points. Rhetorical question examples that begin with who would or who wouldn't include: who wouldn't enjoy more free time to participate in hobbies? Who would want that responsibility? Who wouldn't enjoy living a healthier life? Rhetorical question starter number 5. Isn't it time? Isn't it time style rhetorical questions appeal to the audience's desire to act. This type of rhetorical question works wonders when it links to the call to action at the end of the persuasive piece. Examples of rhetorical questions that begin with isn't it time include: isn't it time we made a change? Isn't it time we listened to the experts? Isn't it time we consider the needs of those less fortunate? And that's that. My top.
Okay, Year 4. So that video there, which you can go back and view, has some had those sentence starters, and all of those are going to be really useful when it comes on to our writing soon. But what I'd like you to do today is, for each of those sentence starters, can you create a rhetorical question relating to plastic pollution and its effects on the environment? Okay, now we're going to call upon these next week when it comes to do our end of piece writing. Okay, but all of these have some really powerful thought, but they have different touches. Okay, so like the "isn't it time" one, for instance, like the guy was saying in the video, it's a really good one to come in at the end because it leaves them. It's sort of like a call to action, saying, "Come on, it's time we do something about this. Let's go." And that's a really nice way to round off your piece of writing that we're going to do next week. Okay, but some of them are really challenging to the listener or the reader, what we call the audience, for making them think. Remember, that's the role of the rhetorical question, is to make the audience think. So, can you come up with at least one sentence for each of those sentence starters related to plastic pollution and its effects on the environment? As an added extension as well, though, year 4, maybe you can use a rhetorical question that has got some emotive language. Okay, so we learned about emotive language earlier on. What if we had some emotive language in our rhetorical questions just to give it some really deep impact? So earlier on in the lesson, I had the word catastrophic. Have you ever thought of the catastrophic event that could happen if we carry on polluting our oceans with plastic? So, having some emotive language in there is just making it so much more powerful. Okay, year 4. If you need to go back through and listen to the explanations of any of those sentence starters, you can be earlier on in the video, but I can't wait to see the questions that you come up with on this one. You're doing really well. Only a few more days to go now. See you soon.